At last, when he could endure no more, he jerked his hands apart. The blazing matches fell sizzling into the snow, but the birch bark was alight. He began laying dry grasses and the tiniest twigs on the flame. He could not pick and choose, for he had to use what he could lift between the heels of his hands. Small pieces of rotten wood and green moss clung to the twigs, and he bit them off as well as he could with his teeth. He cherished the flame, carefully and awkwardly. It meant life, and it must not perish. The lack of blood reaching the surface of his body now made him begin to shiver, and he grew more awkward. A large piece of green moss fell squarely on the little fire. He tried to poke it out with his fingers, but he couldn't control his shivering, and he disrupted the core of the little fire, causing the burning grasses and the tiny twigs to separate and scatter. He tried to poke them together again, but despite the intensity of his effort, his shivering got in the way, and the twigs were hopelessly scattered. Each twig gushed a puff of smoke and went out. The fire provider had failed. As he looked around him, his eyes chanced upon the dog, sitting among the ruins of the fire in the snow. It was making restless, hunching movements, slightly lifting one foot and then the other, shifting its weight back and forth with wistful eagerness. The sight of the dog put a wild idea into the man's head. He remembered the tale of a man caught in a blizzard who killed a steer and crawled inside the carcass and was saved. He would kill the dog and bury his hands in his warm body until the numbness went out of them. Then he could build another fire. He spoke to the dog, calling it to him, and his voice was a strange note of fear that frightened the animal, who had never known the man to speak in such a way before. Something was the matter, and its suspicious nature sensed danger. It did not know what danger, but somewhere, somehow, in its brain arose an apprehension of the man. It flattened its ears down at the sound of the man's voice. Its restless, hunching movements and the shifting of its feet became more pronounced, but it would not come to the man. He got on his hands and knees and crawled toward the dog. This unusual position again caused suspicion, and the animal sidled nervously away. The man sat up in the snow for a moment and struggled for calmness. Then he pulled on his mittens using his teeth and got up on his feet. He glanced down at first to assure himself that he was really standing up. The absence of sensation in his feet left him unable to feel the earth beneath him. His erect position in itself started to drive the suspicion from the dog's mind, and when he spoke with a familiar sound, the dog responded with allegiance and came to him. As it came within reaching distance, the man lost his control. His arms flashed out to the dog, and he experienced genuine surprise when he discovered that his hands could not clutch. There was neither bend nor feeling in his fingers. He had forgotten for the moment that they were frozen and that they were freezing more and more. All this happened quickly, and before the animal could get away, he encircled its body with his arms. He sat down in the snow, and he held the dog while it snarled, whined, and struggled. But it was all he could do to hold its body encircled in its arms and sit there. He realized he could not kill the dog. There was no way to do it. With his helpless hands, he could neither draw nor hold his knife, nor strangle the animal. He released it, and it plunged wildly away, its tail between its legs, still snarling. It halted 40 feet away and surveyed him curiously, with ears sharply pricked forward. The man looked down at his hands in order to locate them, and found them hanging at the ends of his arms. It struck him as curious that he should have to use his eyes in order to figure out where his hands were. He began thrashing his arms back and forth, beating his mittened hands against his sides. He did this for 5 minutes, violently. His heart pumped enough blood to the surface to put a stop to his shivering. But no sensation was aroused in his hands. He had the impression that they hung like weights on the end of his arms. but he could not feel them. A certain fear of death, dull and oppressive, came to him. The fear quickly became stronger as he realized that it was no longer a mere matter of freezing his fingers and toes, or of losing his hands or feet. This was a matter of life and death with the odds against him. This threw him into a panic, and he turned and ran along the old dim trail. The dog joined in behind him and kept up with him. He ran blindly, without thought or intention, in fear as he had never known in his life. Slowly, as he plowed and floundered through the snow, he began to see things again. The banks of the creek, the leafless trees, and the sky. The running made him feel better. He did not shiver. Maybe, if he ran on, his feet would thaw out. And anyway, if he ran far enough, he would reach camp and his friends. Without a doubt, he would lose some fingers and toes, and some of his face. But his friends would take care of him and save him when he got there. At the same time, there was another thought in his mind that told him he would never get to the camp and his friends, that he would soon be stiff and dead. This thought he pushed into the background and refused to consider. Sometimes it pushed itself forward and demanded to be heard, but he thrust it back and tried to think of other things.